All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to break down the anatomy of a threat. Now, it's a word we hear all the time, right? But what we're going to do is explore how that one single idea connects a really tense situation in a small town all the way to a high-stakes standoff between global superpowers. It's fascinating how they're connected.
Likely acts of violence were averted before they happened. I mean, listen to that. That's not a line from some action movie. It's a real quote from a sheriff's office in Alabama. And honestly, it gets right to the very heart of what we're talking about today. That critical moment a threat becomes real enough for someone to step in and say, stop.
Because here's the thing. Whether you're talking about one person planning an attack or an entire nation showing off its military might, the playbook is kind of the same. The mechanics of threats, of deterrence, of response, they're surprisingly similar. So today, we're going to trace that line, starting in a local community and ending up on the global stage.
So, our story kicks off in Grove Hill, Alabama, and it's an incident that takes this abstract idea of a threat and makes it terrifyingly real.
So, let's look at this case, which is modeled on real-life events. In October 2025, a man, Jeremy Wayne Shoemaker, gets arrested. Why? Because he made what the authorities called credible threats of violence against several synagogues. And when they searched his home, well, they found multiple weapons, a whole suitcase just full of ammunition, and body armor. The investigation even showed he was planning to not be taken alive. And that's the key, isn't it? This wasn't just angry words. This was active preparation.
So this is where the law has to step in. The entire case, the entire reason the authorities could act, it all hinged on this one little phrase, a credible threat. But what does that actually mean? Well, legally speaking, a credible threat is not some what-if scenario. It has to feel real, and it has to feel immediate. It's the kind of threat that would make any reasonable person, you, me, anyone, genuinely fear for their safety or the safety of people around them. It's really the difference between some random angry comment online and a detailed plan backed up by the tools to carry it out.
In this table, wow, this really shows you how seriously the law takes this stuff, especially when it's against religious property. Just look at how the consequences ramp up under federal law. It starts at 3 years in prison for serious property damage. But add a weapon to the mix, and it jumps to 20 years. Use fire or explosives? 40 years. And if someone dies as a result of the act, it can lead to a life sentence or even the death penalty. The takeaway is crystal clear. The potential outcome of the threat directly defines the severity of the punishment.
So what happens when threats like this aren't just a one-off event, but a constant, nagging reality? Well, communities are forced to change. Security stops being something you think about once in a while and becomes a fundamental part of just daily life.
Just look at this number, 100%. Let that sink in. A recent survey of synagogue leaders found that every single one of them now hires professional security. It's not a question of if anymore. It's just a question of how. That tells you everything you need to know about the perceived level of threat. It's constant.
And when you dig into the details, it gets even more telling. We're not just talking about any security. An overwhelming majority, 96%, are hiring armed guards or off-duty police officers. That's a very specific calculation about the kind of threats they believe they're facing. And all of this creates a totally new reality. We're seeing things like 24/7 video surveillance becoming almost universal. New jobs are literally being created, like dedicated security coordinators. And of course, all of this costs a lot of money, which often means new security fees for the community members. It is a massive, systemic shift in how these places have to operate.
Okay, so we've seen how this plays out on a local level. Now I want you to take that exact same logic of threats, of deterrence, of response, and let's scale it way, way up. What happens when it's not an individual and a community, but nuclear-armed nations playing the same game?
Now check out this hypothetical, but totally plausible timeline from late 2025. It starts with moves that are mostly symbolic, right? Like the US dusting off the old title Department of War. But then, the threats get very real, very fast. In October, Russia tests a nuclear-capable missile. Then, just 8 days later, the US announces a huge escalation. It's going to resume nuclear explosive testing. And all of this is happening while the world's very last nuclear arms treaty is literally about to expire. You can see how each step is a reaction to the last one and how quickly things can spiral.
Okay, but to really get the danger here, you have to understand the massive difference between these two tests. On one hand, you have Russia's test, which is nuclear capable. That means they're testing the missile, the delivery system, that could carry a nuke. Importantly, it does not break the global ban on nuclear testing. But the proposed U.S. test? That's nuclear explosive, an actual, real detonation of a nuclear bomb. A move like that would completely shatter the U.S. moratorium that's been in place since 1992. It would be a hugely provocative signal to the entire world.
And the context for all this posturing is, well, it's just staggering. These aren't small threats we're talking about. Look at these arsenals. Russia and the United States each have over 5,000 nuclear warheads. For decades, the only thing keeping those numbers in check were treaties and this shared fear of total annihilation. And you see China there, building up its arsenal, but still nowhere near those two giants. When you're making threats with numbers on this scale, and all the old rules are falling apart, even a tiny miscalculation could be catastrophic.
So this all brings us to the strategy behind it. It's this old, revived Cold War idea called escalate to de-escalate. The thinking is, if you make a really aggressive move, if you ramp up the threat, you're signaling such overwhelming strength that your rivals have no choice but to back down and come to the negotiating table. But man, it is a monumental gamble.
Because what if that gamble fails? What if other nations don't back down but decide to escalate right back at you? Well, then you faced a totally new reality. As one analysis puts it, what follows isn't just another arms race, it's something more complex, riskier, and a whole lot more dangerous. We would be entering a completely unstable three-way nuclear standoff that the world has never, ever seen before.
Which brings us to our final question. From a heavily armed individual in a small town in Alabama to superpowers trading nuclear threats on the world stage, the logic is exactly the same. Make a threat to prevent a worse outcome. But as these threats keep escalating at every single level of society, you just have to ask, where does that line exist? Where does deterrence end and where does disaster begin?